not the leader of the PSC, but I am grateful to be part of this deputation for Hackney Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and proud to be standing alongside colleagues and peers from Unison and Hackney Divestment Camp. We are united in calling on Hackney Council Pension Committee to stop investing in companies that profit from war and oppression. I'm a Hackney resident and I'm a humanitarian aid worker. I've been an aid worker for 13 years, and I've worked in some of the world's worst war zones in Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, amongst many others. And so when Israel's assault on Gaza began in October, I was asked to set up Save the Children's response on the Egyptian side of the border. There is no crisis in the world where humanitarian space and law have been so severely disrespected, where people are bombarded relentlessly in an open-air prison, prevented from fleeing, and blocked from the basics for survival. A child in Gaza is killed every 10 minutes. Those who survive are often left with permanent disabilities and no surviving family members. Gaza is the world's most dangerous place to be an aid worker, as well as having the world's fastest developing hunger crisis. These crimes are very well documented by international courts and human rights organizations. I'm also half Palestinian. My mother was born and raised in Gaza before she came to the UK as an NHS worker. So since October, my phone has been flooded with stories and images of the most unimaginable suffering. A family being forced to flee from so-called safe zones, which were never safe. Nothing could prepare me for the horrors that my family have experienced. My uncle, who worked in the Hackney Unison emergency ward, described children dying in his arms from the pain of being operated on without an anesthetic. Another uncle described pulling his best friend from under the rubble. My mum's cousin was killed with his wife, 4 children, and 16 family members at the start of the crisis from one blast. This blast to their house was so severe that parts of their bodies flew into my family's home, and the damage was so extensive that the bodies of 2 of their children were never recovered. Hackney has been my home for over 9 years. It's my safe space where I recuperate between humanitarian missions. So when I learned that the council invests in companies that manufacture the weapons that are currently raining down on my friends, family, and colleagues in Gaza and in other war zones around the world that I have worked in, I was sickened and ashamed. Hackney has never denied its investments in these companies. Instead, it claims the only way it can provide a good retirement for its workers is to continue financing what the ICJ has called plausible genocide. But we know that that is not true. East Sussex Council have proved that divestment is possible if we want to do it. In a document that Hackney Palestine Solidarity Campaign emailed to all of you earlier today, based on advice from investment specialists, we've set out practical steps that Hackney can take towards ethical divestment while guaranteeing workers' pensions. 90% of the hundreds of council workers who responded to Unison's recent survey said they do not consent to their pensions being invested in arms companies. Nobody here expects divestment to happen tomorrow. We're just asking Hackney to commit to not profiting from war in Palestine or anywhere in the world, and that we set up a transparent process to review how this can be done in line with our legal obligations. Through this incredibly difficult time, one thing has given me hope, which is the overwhelming support we've had for this campaign from the Hackney community, from the different groups, from diverse backgrounds and ages.
Thank you. Can you wrap up now? Thank you. Can you wrap up now? Thank you.
So after I've finished talking, you'll hear from an opposing deposition, but in contrast to our campaign, there's no evidence that their position has the same level of broad support in Hackney. This is not a complex issue between two sides, but a simple question about whether or not Hackney Council Pension Fund should be investing in and financially profiting from war, a question that workers and Hackney residents have overwhelmingly responded with no. I hope that nobody in this room ever has to experience the horrors of war, and I hope nobody here ever has to suffer like my family, friends, and colleagues have suffered. But I also hope and demand that the people who work in this building and provide the services to this wonderful community are no longer compelled to have the blood of innocent people on their hands.
Thank you.
This is your opportunity to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Be back on? Right. The question is, representation matters. The question is, does this committee agree that representation matters? If so, will you commit to undertaking a wider scheme consultation on fund investments with our input on the format and wording, etc.? Will you also look to do what some other local authorities have done, create a dedicated trade union seat on the committee? We've surveyed workers, and this is what they want. Will you hear the workers?
Thank you. Make your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. May I first thank the committee for permitting our deputation and for letting me speak on its behalf. Pension fund trustees and managers have fiduciary duties that are legal obligations to maximise the return on investments of the pension funds consistently with prudence. And as stated in the 2014 Law Commission report, which is widely regarded as authoritative and has been approved by the Supreme Court as far as relevant, in general, non-financial factors may only be taken into account if two tests are both met. First, the trustee should have good reason to think that scheme members would share the concern, and secondly, that the decision should not involve a risk of significant financial detriment to the fund. And with regard to the first point, the Law Commission report adds that in cases where the issue is clearly controversial, the courts may well expect trustees to focus on financial factors rather than becoming embroiled in disagreements between the members. Israel-Palestine is clearly controversial, probably the most controversial issue on the planet, even though there are other conflicts where there have regrettably been far more casualties. It is also very divisive, particularly in Hackney, which has many Jews and many Muslims. So it doesn't meet the first of the Law Commission's conditions at all. And as regards the second condition, I will point out that many major companies operate in Israel and indeed in territories administered by Israel and in other disputed territories such as Northern Cyprus and Western Sahara. In addition, Hackney's pension fund primarily invests in funds rather than individual companies for good financial reasons. And it's usually impossible to exclude particular companies from these funds. It may be possible to exit a fund, but there are charges for doing so. And it is difficult to find funds that, for example, don't invest in companies that operate in disputed territories. And I think the Palestine Solidarity Campaign has varied its target. I think it was targeting before companies that had an involvement in Israel or in territories that are governed by Israel. Now it's saying, oh, we're just against arms companies. But if I can remind the committee that arms are needed by people who wish to defend themselves and stop genocidal terrorists repeating their mass atrocities again and again as they threaten and promise to do. Some arms, there are, you can say, there's a general view that they should be prohibited, and that is very often achieved. But arms generally, it is a problematic area. So the second condition is unlikely to be satisfied. And there are very good reasons for these conditions, in addition to the importance of complying with the law. First of all, divestment targeting Israel promotes hostility. It may not be completely logical, but there is extensive evidence from empirical research carried out at US universities that BDS activity targeting Israel promotes anti-Semitism. Secondly, boycotts and divestment are unlikely to impact their target unless there is very extensive international compliance, and often not even then, as Russia is currently showing. And thirdly, a local council does not have the tools and systems to make accurate judgments on complex foreign conflicts. This is particularly so in relation to the Middle East, where there is so much
You've got a minute left. Thank you.
false information. You want me to finish, or?
Yeah, you've got a minute left. A minute. You've got 1 minute.
1 minute left. Yeah. Well, I just want to say that I'd like to reply quickly to some points made by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. The suggestion that the situation in Gaza is somehow more terrible and worse than other conflicts is not correct at all. There's full-scale genocide taking place in Darfur, terrible conditions in Yemen.
Thank you. Time is up now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Turner. So you can have your seat. So I'm going to the conclusion to finish off this agenda item. Thank you to both sides for taking the time to bring your deputations to the Pensions Committee this evening. Hackney is home to diverse residents from different nationalities, cultural heritage, and faiths. This includes large Muslim and Jewish communities. I recognize that the attack by Hamas on the 7th of October to the devastating Israeli bombardment of the Gaza Strip that has followed has caused much distress and anger across the world within our borough. So thank once again for bringing this deputation before the committee. A full response will be published. However, for this evening, specifically with regards to the call to divest, the investments in question are not directly held by the Hackney Pension Fund and are mainly in passive investment funds. A feature of the passive investment fund is that even the investment manager does not control which stocks are included in the portfolio. Therefore, the only way of divesting from the stock listed will be to dispose of the whole investment fund and find alternative solution which will guarantee exclusion of those companies. This will expose the Hackney funds to significant cost, resulting from both the transaction of assets and the requirement to use a
That's technically incorrect.
Excuse me, can you just carry on and stop interrupting? And stop interrupting. Thank you. So this will expose the Hackney Pension Fund to significant costs resulting from both the transaction of assets and the requirement to use a highly customized investment strategy. The committee therefore believes that commitment to the form of divestment requested will risk financial detriment to the fund and will therefore breach Law Commission guidance. The Pension Committee will be unable to commit to divestment in this instance for the reason outlined above, but responsible investment remain at the forefront of the committee's agenda.
That was technically incorrect.
Excuse me, can I just stop interrupting? Otherwise, I'm going to adjourn the meeting to stop interrupting. So, to this end, the committee is reviewing the fund's investment strategy and agrees changes with a specific focus on delivering the committee's responsible investment priorities. Because of the cost of change and the nature of large-scale pension funds, investment strategies are implemented over a long period. The fund's successful policy to reduce its exposure to fossil fuel by net 7% took 6 years, and was deemed to be entirely within the fund's fiduciary responsibilities because of the financial risks to such investment as net zero policies are adopted more widely. The fund also continues as an active member of the National Local Authority Pension Fund, which champions responsible investment through robust engagement with companies in which they invest. In 2022, LAFEF worked to engage over 50 companies that operate in the occupied Palestinian territories to promote enhanced human rights due diligence to ensure that they are not contributing to any direct or indirect human rights abuses. I understand and share your frustration that the pension fund is restricted in this matter, but I hope I have been able to understand, clarify the position, to understand how the situation we find ourselves in is different to when the Hackney Pension Fund divested from Russia. Please look out for the full response. As I've stated before, a full response will be published. So thank you very much for coming this evening. So that is the end. Excuse me. Finish now, so we're going to move on to the next agenda item. You are free to leave. Thank you. And now we have some peace and quiet. So moving on to agenda item